Welcome everyone to today's episode of Forward Thinking. We have a guest on today, actually one of our newest members of CS2, Allison Rouse. Allison's one of our senior consultants, and we thought it would be great to have her on to talk about a conversation that we've alluded to on some of our last episodes of saying we want to dedicate an episode to this, and that's revenue operations. It's a interesting topic because everyone has their different definitions, or some people are thinking about moving to creating a revenue operations team. And Allison actually was part of an organization before CS2 who moved to creating a revenue operations function. So welcome, Allison.
Hi, yeah, glad to be on the podcast.
Great. Yeah, we're excited. So we're going to keep this pretty loose for you guys, but we wanted to kind of talk through some of the top questions on your mind. Some came through from LinkedIn, all about revenue operations, because I think a lot of people are still scratching their heads on a few different things. So yeah, did you want to kick it off, Charlie?
Yeah. So I'll be asking the questions of Christy and Allison. And the first one really is just, how do you define it? I mean, lots of people have lots of thoughts, and I think this is a great place to start. So Allison, why don't you take it away? How do you define revenue ops?
Sure, yeah. In my mind, revenue ops is where, marketing ops, sales ops, customer success ops all sit. Basically, any of the operations functions that are responsible for customer acquisition, growth, and retention, all part of the same group, so that they can align on the process, the technology, the data, all in one group. So one process, one tech stack, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think I agree with Allison, and I think we'll talk about in a bit about who are all the functions that make that up. And I think that's where, because that definition is so broad of sales and marketing and customer success, a lot of things come up like, does that include sales enablement? And, how does that whole kind of reporting structure work? So, yeah.
Yeah. So how broad or how narrow can it be and then still be called RevOps? Can you have a RevOps team that's primarily just sales ops people, but still be called RevOps, or if they exclude marketing or they exclude customer success? And then what are additional teams outside of those three that could still be wrapped up into it?
When we were implementing RevOps at my last company, before we implemented, I was in marketing ops. And we had talked about having a RevOps function, but having it be less formal, or having it be less of a department in and of itself and more of a coalition of the willing. And so we kind of met more informally between marketing ops and sales ops. But luckily, our CEO came from a prior company where she had implemented RevOps, and eventually it became more formal. And other groups started to join, like customer success. So, I think it can be, and that's kind of why it's kind of vague right now, where it can be an official department, it can be that coalition of the willing. I do think, and I'm just personally biased, maybe being in marketing ops, that marketing ops should still be part of the puzzle if you are going to do it, rather than it just being sales ops, because the whole point of RevOps is alignment across the entire revenue engine, which includes marketing.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that, because I have seen it, like maybe someone who, for my definition is a sales ops person, be called like a revenue ops manager. And that might just be because they're a small company that they want to then maybe somehow like plug in some of those other like duties or other parts of what isn't considered sales ops onto that person. But I do think that at a minimum, like sales and marketing, having that alignment being part of that team is kind of the first minimum place to start. So there's that alignment, like Allison said.
Yeah. So what we're saying here is it doesn't have to be, a hierarchical structure of where everyone reports into the same team. You can have a RevOps team that is more dotted lines between the teams and where you have that alignment. But is there a benefit to having everyone reporting into the same structure, do you think?
I definitely think so, because having an operations leader that can provide that visibility to the rest of the executive team is really important. One thing I think I quickly realized when we started to gain momentum in RevOps at my last company was that it really gave leadership visibility into a lot of the key business metrics that felt pretty elusive to them prior to us being one team, because they had to go and grab it from different departments. Maybe they had different definitions for, like, even something as simple as what's a land deal, what's an expand deal. Each department might have varying definitions of how we've defined land and expand, and just simplifying it and having those same definitions across the board, having one dashboard or set of dashboards to go to was just, very enlightening to the leadership team. So I think it's important to at least have somebody in charge, whether it's formal or informal, that has that visibility into leadership.
And who should that person be? One thing I've done a bit of thinking about is who should the leader of RevOps be? Because I think my point of view, coming from marketing operations, and maybe I'm massively biased, so tell me if you think I'm being biased here, but I feel like a really great marketing ops person that has done their job to work cross-functionally, get into tools like Salesforce and other, typically, sales ops owned platforms, and to really build the bigger picture in their mind. I feel like marketing ops gets more of that. They get more exposure to the sales ops side. Whereas sales ops, it's very rare that you see a sales ops person go into a marketing automation platform. But every marketing ops person should be, in my opinion, working towards being an admin in Salesforce. So I kind of lean towards the best person to lead the team, who's going to understand the priorities across everything and have the breadth of knowledge across as much of it as possible, would be someone who's traditionally come through marketing ops, especially now where revenue ops is a relatively new concept, and it's not like everyone starts off in revenue ops and then can rise up the ranks. It's kind of everything's combining now. So you're going to have to choose someone from like a sales ops background or a marketing ops background for the time being. But what do you think? Do you think I'm right or biased, or do you think there's anything to that, what I'm saying?
I mean, I'll answer first.
We're probably all biased on this call, though, aren't we?
We're all good.
We should have brought a sales ops.
I think we're both a bit biased. I think that I know my opinion is who I think it shouldn't roll into, and that's someone who doesn't have an operations background at all. And I think sometimes you will see this happen with it rolls into a CRO, but a lot of the time a CRO is kind of more focused on sales and that sales enablement or just the whole selling process. And that's only a very small piece of revenue ops as far as their world. But also that person has a lot of control on where the priorities live. So when you see that, you sometimes see that a big chunk of the roadmap is focused on what's going to benefit sales or deal desk or opportunities and stuff like that, and less on maybe some of the other areas like the marketing ops. And so that person in marketing ops or that's supporting that function feels a bit like lost or are pushing back against marketing when maybe they shouldn't be. So there's not that like alignment. And then the operational aspect is like, this is operations team. You need someone who kind of knows how to develop a roadmap, knows how to set priorities, understands data, like what Allison was talking about, and setting that standard set of best practices for data and how it's going to be used across that whole revenue function. So I do think it could be someone from the sales ops side, especially if their strong suit is just that operational aspect of the high level of like being able to be strategic. So marketing ops, sales ops person, whoever it may be, like both, I think are positioned as long as they kind of have some of those leadership, prioritization, and like strategic skills and understand that big picture. I don't know what you think, Allison, but.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Definitely needs to be someone that has an operations background. A couple of things. One is that I do think that folks in marketing ops have a good headway on leading revenue ops initiatives, only because, and again, I'm biased, but I think because marketing sometimes is very much not a hard science and there's a lot of ambiguity to it. And especially in marketing ops, you have to bring clarity to that ambiguity. And because RevOps is so new and there's a lot to navigate, someone who's able to bring clarity to ambiguity is really important in a leader. So that's why I think marketing ops is positioned well to lead that.
That's a great answer. I like that.
My prior company, yeah, at my prior company, we had a VP of RevOps, and she had run a RevOps org at her prior company, and came with a lot of experience. And I think she did come from mostly a sales ops background, but she did know a lot of the other functions really well. And then she ultimately rolled up to our CFO. We did also have a CRO, but he was headed up all of sales, like you said. And I know initially when he took on that role, there were a lot of questions of like, is the CRO now going to be the head of RevOps? But I think having it under finance kept it really close to the numbers, kept it really close to, the ultimate goal of, revenue, growth, retention, all of that stuff. So
yeah.
Yeah, and I think one really important thing I heard around the structuring here is because if you have, it sounds like you need that intermediary layer between maybe if you have a marketing ops person, a sales ops person, and a customer customer success ops. They all can't just report into your CFO or your CRO, because you'll still just have three different teams then, because the CRO or CFO probably doesn't understand enough about the intricacies of all of those teams to be able to direct them as one team. So you need someone between them to be able to be the head of revenue ops, to be able to assign the priorities and make sure that the team is working as one team. Otherwise, you could probably still going to have the same issues as you had before when you have three separate teams. But even if they do, you call them all revenue ops, right?
Yeah. And I think that what you'll just see is that they'll be managed by someone that isn't their manager, really. And that's part of also, I think, based on the size of the company, where I think it probably makes sense to make the right decision on if they're ready to go to a revenue ops team. And that's where I think, like when you said like the dotted line structure versus an actual reporting structure makes sense for, if you're a small company, a dotted line I think is easier because of whoever that person's going to report into. And also just for how those companies work. I think once you hit a certain size though, where you have enough people that fall under those functions and you have enough like headcount to really have those layers, then it makes sense to maybe drive toward having an actual reporting structure with a department that's official.
Yeah. They kind of have the revenue ops mindset and kind of practice, even if you don't have the team structure yet, because the company may have to reach a certain level of maturity and size to have the proper team structure there.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to dig into is priorities, because my big concern with revenue operations, for me personally, coming from a marketing operations background, is that the priorities will shift away from what marketing needs and more towards what sales needs. And obviously the ultimate goal is revenue. So that might be the right thing to do, right? Maybe that is the right thing. But that I wouldn't want that decision just to be made because of kind of who the team rolls up into, or who, you know, the person's background, if they come from sales ops. And marketing ops really, sales ops generally will, you know, they help with a lot of execution, but they're dealing with big projects for the sales team. With marketing ops, there is that ongoing campaign execution that needs to happen. So if all of this time is being sucked away from helping the marketing team to helping the sales team, then you could leave the marketing team without their execution partner. So I'd love to know what you both think around how should you structure priorities, and have you had any experience where priorities, or have you seen any clients, or Alison, you in a past life, where priorities really were a difficult part of bringing all of these teams together? Or if it wasn't difficult, how did you make it not difficult?
Yeah. I definitely think it was difficult in part, and you know, definitely it's where the loudest voice in the room can kind of dictate the priorities. At my last company, we would meet, you know, quarterly in RevOps and discuss kind of what are all the things that are related kind of client departments, you know, marketing, sales, customer success, that they need us to achieve this quarter. And we get it all down on paper, and we, you know, do kind of like what we recommend here at CS2, a prioritization matrix on, you know, level of effort and the, you know, business impact. And, you know, we'd categorize things as a P1, a P2, a P3, and P1s were things that we would work on every day. P2s were things we'd work on every week. And then P3s were like once a month. And then if you don't have any P1, P2. But in terms of the relative departments, yeah, I think that is really challenging, especially in marketing ops, because marketing, as much as cliche as it is, still has a hard time not being a hard science, being at the revenue table and showing a direct like line of impact to revenue. So I think it's just important to have, you know, a voice for each of those departments in that prioritization meeting. And you're really talking about trade-offs, because there's only so much time in the team's day and what can realistically get done. I think one of the downsides of RevOps sometimes is that, you know, the company may think you can do more work with less people if they're all in the same department, which is not true. I do think that, you know, putting everyone in one department doesn't in itself solve the like disconnects, but I think it allows those decisions to be made more quickly and with less friction now that you're all part of the same team. So, which can make prioritization easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know that's a lot.
No, I have to say I agree with Alison. And I, you know, you said something about like, well, sales is like closer to revenue, but I feel like you can't close revenue unless you have pipeline, and marketing has like a lot more control on creating pipeline and finding that for the sales team. Of course, there's like outbound prospecting and everything, but I think that, and now a big part of marketing's like whole thing is like all focused on the customer journey, which goes all the way through to when they're talking to sales, to, you know, when they're even a customer. And so marketing is touching everything that even those, you know, the same people that those other departments are touching. So that further proves that there needs to be alignment, and marketing needs to be part of that. But also, if the customer journey and making that effective and easy and seamless and is going to make selling easier, make that customer happiness better, that's all things that those other departments should really be interested in. And like, what's the roadmap for that? How is that going? And how can we be a part of that? So that's why I think RevOps has gained steam, not because it's like makes operations easier or makes it easy, you know, easier to drive some of these projects. It does, but I think because we're realizing that we're all kind of one team here with a common goal. And so much of what we do touches each other. So when there's that disparate set of systems, data, how we're looking at what that journey looks like, that's when we're seeing disconnect. And when companies are doing it together, they see better returns, better customer happiness. And so just having that alignment, I think you hear that clearly here. We're just not even just saying they don't need to be on the team, but having that alignment with each other is key.
Yeah, I still feel though I have a concern with marketing's priorities getting deprioritized. Partly what Alison mentioned, the loudest voice in the room. Mm-hmm. I don't want to, be overly kind of broad with this statement, but generally sales is louder than marketing. And by then default, sales ops can probably be a little bit louder than marketing ops sometimes. It depends on the personalities, of course. But if you don't have a strong leader in marketing ops that has that strong voice, is able to tie what they're doing to revenue really well, I could totally see how the sales priorities would be pushed forward more. Maybe more budget would go into sales tech, the marketing tech that's needed, and the priorities will shift when they're in the same team, because they're having to make the trade-offs and they're looking at everything with one team, and then you have to decide on what the priorities are. That's just, but I think
I think that you might be right. I think that you might be right, because I think I'm thinking, I'm too forward thinking and what I was saying. And I think that's where people are moving toward, but you're right still now. And honestly, I think a big part of that is like all of the companies also that think of Salesforce as their like system of truth, of like, this is where everything needs to live. This is where everything is going. Like, and so everyone instantly thinks sales ops. And then so they'll like staff that team really well. But also give, like, there's so much more but then we're seeing tools from that then to get sent over to marketing ops, but they're not getting any more bodies to support all of that. So they're drowning, where sales ops has maybe a bit more flexibility, time.
Well, you look at a lot of companies out there, right? They'll have a few sales ops people. They might have more senior people in sales ops, but they'll have like one marketing ops manager. And then, so if you bring all of them, and obviously it always depends, right? It depends on who the leader is, and it depends on how they build the structure. But I could probably guess that in many cases, if once those teams get brought together, that marketing ops manager voice is going to be drowned out a bit when they're trying to get what they need, because what they're trying to get what they need out of that reporting structure, which is very focused on sales. And sales, it's so easy for salespeople or the sales team or anything related to sales to prove that that's going to impact revenue, right? Because that's all they do. They close deals. So, and I think for marketing, it is harder, but you have to get good at it. And it is something that marketing people need to work at, and they're developing, and is gaining a lot of traction, a lot of steam recently, but it's still something I think that people need to learn a bit better. And I'm not saying I'm against RevOps or anything like that. I still think it's the right direction to go in. But that's always been my biggest concern. It's just, are the priorities going to shift?
Yeah. What do you think, Alison? Or actually, because I have an opinion too, but I want to hear yours first. But what do you think is something that you could put in place to ensure that marketing ops doesn't get deprioritized?
I think, one of the things that actually helped us as we were implementing RevOps, at the same time, we were also implementing an ABM strategy. And because ABM really requires alignment, and obviously so does RevOps, and in a lot of ways, ABM is easier to grasp than RevOps. Aligning all the go-to-market functions around ABM allowed them to see kind of the interconnectedness between the departments and the reliance that each department had on each other. So I think even just moving to an ABM structure really helped. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that we kind of, for me, my opinion, I think one, and you kind of alluded to this, and this is what, but having their own roadmap, like each of those different kind of teams within that revenue ops function should probably have like their own roadmap that they're still managing.
Should they though, or should it still be the revenue ops roadmap?
I think that it can be like surface level or revenue ops roadmap, but if you think about those teams, like they operate so differently.
But isn't that the whole point? They want to operate.
But the thing is like but then having that communication to know and alignment to know what are all the other projects and roadmaps that the other teams are working on that touch these systems. And these are all my opinions, but I do think a campaign process and stuff, as someone who leads customer success operations, like they don't need to know the intricacies of all of that, but they need to know a marketing ops team like has that in place or what their roadmap is too. But I think a big part of revenue operations is just that alignment we've talked about, shared data, documentation, and like change management. Having that all aligned is like where I see the biggest impact. So I'll give an example of a client that I have. I kind of, our team sits and helps out on the marketing ops side. They do have like a revenue ops function that's mainly sitting on the sales ops and deal desk side. But there's a shared, documentation, shared projects in Jira, but they're even tagged differently as marketing ops versus sales ops versus customer success ops. And we meet every Thursday for that joint meeting where we go through all of the different priorities and talk about things as a group. And that gives a good chance too for someone to provide maybe insight from another team, but we're still working on our own projects like separately at the end of the day. But just having that shared alignment on the documentation, change management, and like just projects that are coming up in these shared systems, it was enough to bring clarity and have that team actually executing faster. And so for me, a big benefit, but this is all debated. Everything here, this is why it's a hot topic. But for me, it's just alignment. And a big part of alignment is just that the shared like change management process, data, everything. But marketing ops should still have a roadmap that's very much aligned to marketing's goals that they're executing against.
I would love to know, Alison, explain how it worked in your previous life, because I hear what you're saying and I agree that's probably a better way of doing it. But if everyone's reporting to the same person, then surely marketing ops roadmap they should all be in one roadmap because you should be working on shared projects, right? But Alison, tell me what you think.
Yeah, I think it's probably fine to have separate roadmaps, but it feeds kind of the master RevOps roadmap. And you might have a case where, a marketing ops, core project trumps a sales ops core project. And that's like what you have to negotiate and discuss when you do your prioritization. I think too, one thing that's really important is if you are moving to a department, an official RevOps department, that you still don't lose that dotted line connection to the customer facing departments. I always kind of thought of RevOps as, our customers are the internal departments, and then the internal departments, they're customer facing while we're internal facing. And one of the things that we kept going once we became a department is I still went to every marketing department meeting. I still had regular meetings with the CMO, that we didn't lose that connection. And essentially it was part of our job as a representative of marketing to come to the table in RevOps and say, this is what the CMO is asking for, and this is what we need, and being his voice in the room. We were lucky enough to have a very, our CMO had a very strong voice on the leadership team. And so in a lot of ways, we did get to drive a lot of the priorities. And I think especially because we were implementing ABM at the same time, really that's where we were able to shine and bring clarity to like, well, what are our target accounts? What are the different tiers? How are we going to operationalize this in our systems? And I think another area where RevOps had been really great was in the tech stack. Every single piece of technology that the go-to-market functions wanted to purchase came across one group, my group at Puppet. And we were able to get rid of some technology that was redundant because we were using one tech stack. Or let's say the customer success department wanted to buy a tool to manage the events that they were managing. Well, marketing already had a tool to manage events, so we didn't need to purchase another tool. And so I think that consolidation allowed us to be more efficient with our resources. So
yeah, and I love that. And that's a very important point, bringing everything together. And I want to be a bit of I feel like I'm being a bit of a contrarian, so I'm going to carry on like that a bit, just to kind of
annoyance,
be a bit devil's advocate, because again, I think the and to your point, or about both your points around kind of making sure there's still that dotted line to marketing. Absolutely, 100% agree with that. If you're going to move to a very official hierarchy within revenue ops, the marketing ops piece of that still needs to be very aligned to marketing. That's my concern, right? Could that be broken at some point? And
I do have like a kind of a thing that comes to mind very easily is I don't like when operations teams like are too focused on operations. And that sounds really weird, but there's a lot of strategy and like business mindset and like just understanding what's good marketing that I still think that a marketing ops team benefits from knowing. And sometimes when I feel like there isn't that strong alignment, like Allison's talking about, or sitting in those meetings or being close to CMO, that's where then it just becomes this team that's just executing things. And that's when I think that actually you'll just end up building stuff that doesn't scale or doesn't have the business, like how the business even operates in mind, or someone to actually own, oh, what's great marketing strategy? Like you're not measuring things, you're really just executing. And that's like what I don't want operations teams to just be like. And so that's why I still think that having that strong base and foundation in the strategy, the ideas, the creative behind it, still makes sense.
Yeah,
I don't want that to get lost.
Exactly. Well, very, very true. And maybe there could be a time, if I'm going to continue on with this narrative that I'm developing for myself on this podcast, where marketing ops forgets that, right? Because now they're in revenue ops. Now that maybe the marketing ops person is being brought into sales ops type projects, they don't have time to help the marketing team. And then to what Allison was just saying there, where you said customer success wants a new event platform, but marketing ops has one. I can see, and they're like, well, you should use this. That sounds great. But imagine it the other way around. Customer success has an event platform. Marketing ops like, we need this other one for these other reasons. And then the RevOps team's like, go use the customer success one. But then marketing's like, no, but that doesn't solve what we actually need. But then while you guys are a revenue ops team, you got to just use the same thing, right? So there's good and bad to that. And I think obviously all the devil is in the details. It's always down to like the personalities involved, kind of really how they set it up. Like you mentioned, you had a strong voice, your CMO. That was obviously a big reason why it's successful. You were there. You had kind of marketing ops background. Worked a lot on a lot of the sales ops side. You have really understood the full picture, so you're able to provide that. But in lots of cases where they might not have these benefits, you could see how there could be big problems with consolidating, because the teams really do have very different goals, very different skill sets that they need, very different technologies that they use, but they all do overlap. And so I'm not, I'm not saying I don't like revenue ops. I think it's definitely the way to go on the alignment piece. You just need to make sure that we're not just going into it blind thinking it's going to solve all the problems. easily, right? It's going to create a whole load of new problems. You might have a better set of problems to deal with, and you're going to probably solve some problems. But there are some other problems that arise from it that need to be really thought through.
Totally. I just did an interview. Oh, go ahead, Allison.
I was just going to say, I think too, going back to what Christy said about operations folks being too operations like, I think that's one of the risks with RevOps too, is you get a lot of the same kinds of people with the same kinds of personalities. At my last company, we did this thing called Insights, which is kind of like a personality test. And it's where you get your different colors, and blue is very operations analytic focused. And our team was very, very heavy blue. And I think that's where you can get into the risk of being, having some groupthink, or one of the problems that we faced a lot was being so operations focused. We have to go 6 levels deep on the details when maybe we shouldn't be focused on this one specific detail. Let's get higher level. And so I think that's one of the risks, especially because you get the same kinds of folks in the room, where back when, I was in marketing around people who were a bit more creative and less operations and into the data and the details. It was a bit of a better mixture of folks on the team. So I think just making sure that you have a varying levels of personalities on the team, I think, is even important.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, marketing operations being that kind of consultant for the marketing team. And Alison, you're kind of alluding to it there, that, if you are buddying up with people on the marketing team, you're going to understand them better. You're going to be able to meet their needs better, consult them better, build things for them better. But if there is a bit of a disconnect, then you could start getting down more focused on just being too technical and forget that you're a marketer, right? In marketing operations, I think you don't want to forget that you're still a marketer, and that you really, and I think this is one of the dangers too. Like maybe the marketing ops person, a lot of marketing ops people have come from a marketing background. You start in demand gen, you basically started using Marketo or Pardot or something, and then you're like, this is cool, I'm going to do this more, and now you're in marketing ops. I think there's a danger in losing that, because I think nowadays people are starting off in marketing operations, or people are maybe, if you have a revenue ops function, someone could start off in revenue ops and then move into kind of the marketing ops part of that. But having that insight and empathy for the marketing team and understanding what they go through, what they need, I think is important to be able to serve them better. Mm-hmm. And if you are just within that revenue ops world, you might lose some of that. And then the marketing team in general loses a really good advisor for them to be better at their jobs and perform better.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Let me turn around, because we have to probably end this in a bit. I know I've been a bit devil's advocate here, but let's finish on a high note, shall we? So let's talk about kind of the main, just the main benefits, right? We've kind of touched on it, but if we had to list out a few of the really positive reasons why people should be thinking about this, what are going to be the really big wins that you'd probably see quickly, and you're going to be able to, really kind of revel in the joy of the revenue ops function?
I would say having one source of truth for the data, one source of truth for the business process and the technology would be the main benefit. And your leadership team will see that with, this is the canonical set of reports that we go to each week to run the business. We know what these data points mean. Each department's using the same definitions. So there's that. And then I think even for the folks that work in RevOps, one of the benefits that I felt was just more access to other operational resources. So like my skill levels in our BI tool greatly increased as soon as I joined the RevOps team and surrounded by other people who use that same tool. So I think just having that access and just colleagues who are kind of in the same realm that you are, and can relate to, that request from the C-level exec who's asking for a last minute report that you now have to drop everything and spend all night on. Like we all had to do that, and we all could relate to each other. So I think that's just one of the benefits, is having
that's a really good counter argument.
Other colleagues.
That's a really good counter argument to what I said, where I was like, where if you're not part of the marketing team, you might lose that marketing thing. But often, a lot of times, the marketing ops person in the marketing team does feel like a bit of the lone wolf in the team that is misunderstood, right? So maybe being in the revenue ops team, you now found your family that will understand you.
Yeah. And I think I agree with Allison.
Yeah, that's true.
I think I agree with Allison too, because I was thinking back on a time where I thought like there was complete alignment. And I had my last job before CS2, I basically did sales operations, marketing operations, and everything in between. But I was able to own all the data. I knew all the data on the marketing side, the sales side. I created our dashboard, and I led our Friday meetings and brought in all the stakeholders, and then, sent out all those details to the exec team. So because I was part of both, I was able to do all that like seamlessly. And we all had one set of numbers because I was creating the numbers for everyone. Mm-hmm. And so it did make things a lot easier. And from an executive leadership like view as well, that was a true benefit. And it made it really simple. So to Allison's point, definitely agree on that too. My whole thing, like if someone was like, make a decision now, I actually would say, most likely, I would say be less focused on the department itself and be more focused on just getting your company on this revenue team mindset where there's just pure like alignment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the place to start for a lot of people, because not even just on the operations side, but really even just from a strategic side, there needs to be now this focus on just the whole revenue team working together. So
what would that look like for typical startup, mid-sized company, one who doesn't have a revenue department, but then a revenue ops department, but has multiple teams? What could be some things that they could do today?
Yeah. So for me, that means, instead of doing a sales kickoff, you have a RKO, like a revenue kickoff. So both teams, all the teams that support, even customer success, are all clear from executive leadership on like what the goals are. And you're all like, know about each other, understand each other, all focus. And then having those teams then set an executive leadership kind of goal, like what their North Star is. And then the teams like have their own roadmaps that will support all of that. And just knowing that they can go to each other for things like what Allison was saying, like being able to not just have sales ops, saying, no, we're not going to do that marketing ops thing in Salesforce because they can, making sure that there's this, idea that we're all working together toward a common goal, and having those channels and working closely with each other. And then the strategy standpoint is marketing strategy is really just a whole customer journey strategy. And how do all those different teams play a role in that?
Okay. Well, I feel like we could do a whole nother one on this. I think that from what we're saying, I think that it's clear there are some challenges with revenue operations, but the pros probably outweigh the cons if done properly. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Especially if you're just working towards the mindset first, and then working together as the teams, working on that alignment, that single source of truth, etc., as a really good way to get that flowing, get that moving forward. And then if the whole actual team hierarchy is a whole nother story. Great. Well, Thank you for providing all that insight, answering those questions. I think we should probably do a round 2 on this. But for everyone listening, if you have any other questions or anything you want us to dive into, let us know, and we'll see you on the next episode of Forward Thinking.
See ya.
This is Charlie. So if you liked what you heard, hit like on the platform where you watch this. Also, leave a review. Honestly, we would really, really appreciate it. You can also subscribe where you listen to your podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or even YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which is packed full of exclusive content, updates for events or courses that we might be doing, all designed to elevate your marketing operations and B2B strategy. See you next time on Forward and Forward It Up.